Fire was meant to destroy him, not glorify him. Yet this is the moment where flames lost their power and truth stood untouched. A moment so shocking that even the laws of nature were forced to step aside, because when Allah commands, even fire must obey. This is not just a story from the past. This is the moment when belief challenged an entire world and won. Before we go deeper, tell me where you're watching this from and make sure you subscribe to this channel so you don't miss powerful stories like this that reshape how we see faith, courage, and destiny. The world Prophet Ibrahim was born into was loud with idols and silent of truth, a civilization built on stone gods, inherited traditions, and unquestioned authority, where people worshipped what their hands carved and feared what their rulers commanded. Idols stood tall in temples while hearts bowed lower than the ground, and belief was not chosen but inherited, passed down without thought, without reflection, without asking, why? Fire was not just a tool in this society, it was a threat, a punishment, a warning to anyone who dared to challenge the system. And from the very beginning, Ibrahim stood as a quiet contradiction to everything around him. Even as a young man, Ibrahim saw what others refused to see, that these idols could neither hear prayers nor protect themselves, that gods who could be carried, broken, or repaired could never control the universe. While others found comfort in conformity, Ibrahim felt suffocated by it, his heart restless with questions that burned hotter than the fire his people worshipped. He looked at the stars, the moon, the sun, and realized that anything which rises and sets cannot be divine, because the true Creator does not disappear. What made Ibrahim dangerous was not strength or numbers, but clarity. Because he didn't insult his people, he exposed their beliefs using their own logic, forcing them to confront the emptiness they tried so hard to ignore. He spoke, calmly, but every word shook foundations, asking how something that cannot defend itself could defend a human being, how something created could ever deserve worship. These were not attacks, they were mirrors, and people hate mirrors when they reveal uncomfortable truths. When the moment came, Ibrahim did what no one else had the courage to do. He shattered the idols that ruled his society, leaving only the largest one intact, not out of respect, but as a challenge. When his people returned and saw their gods destroyed, rage exploded through the city, and Ibrahim calmly pointed them to the remaining idol, forcing them to admit with their own mouths that these gods were powerless. In that moment, the truth was undeniable, but instead of surrendering, their pride chose denial, and denial always looks for punishment rather than reflection. Truth became a crime overnight, and Ibrahim became a threat not because he was wrong, but because he was right. The leaders realized that if one man could dismantle belief systems with reason alone, their power would collapse, so they chose fear over faith, spectacle over sincerity. They didn't want discussion, they wanted silence, and silence, they believed, could be enforced with fire. This is how the stage was set, not just for a punishment, but for one of the greatest signs ever shown to mankind. A moment where arrogance gathered all its strength and faith stood alone, calm, certain, and unshaken. What they didn't know was that by choosing fire, they were about to witness the very thing they denied, that Allah alone controls all things, even the flames meant to erase His messenger. And this was only the beginning of a legacy that would burn brighter than any fire they could ever ignite. The decision was made quickly, but the hatred behind it had been growing for years, because when truth cornered them and logic stripped their beliefs bare, they did not feel humbled. They felt exposed, and exposure is something tyrants cannot tolerate. The elders, the rulers, the keepers of idols gathered together not to ask who was right, but to ask how to silence the one voice that made them uncomfortable. They agreed that Ibrahim's words were more dangerous than any weapon, because words can spread, ideas can grow, and belief can escape control. They chose punishment not to correct him, but to terrify everyone else, to send a message that questioning tradition comes with a price. Fire was their answer, because fire was final, fire was public, fire was meant to erase both the man and the message. Orders were given across the land to gather wood, more than had ever been collected before, until a mountain of fuel stood ready, and a pit so massive was prepared that even standing near it felt like standing at the edge of death. The fire was lit and it roared like something alive, its heat so intense that no one could come close, a blaze so fierce that it consumed the air itself. They believed this fire would restore their authority, burn away doubt, and prove once and for all that their gods were still powerful. What they didn't realize was that they were not building a punishment. They were preparing a stage for divine intervention. Ibrahim was brought forward, alone, surrounded by enemies, yet not a single word of fear escaped him. His hands were bound, his body restrained, but his heart was free, anchored in a certainty that did not depend on survival. There was no negotiation, no last chance offered, because truth had already been rejected. And now, arrogance demanded blood. Since no one could approach the fire, they devised a machine to launch him into it, as if distance could protect them from guilt. In that moment, when the world expected screams and desperation, Ibrahim turned fully to Allah, placing his trust not in outcomes but in obedience. He did not ask for escape, he submitted, and that submission shook the unseen realms. As he was thrown through the air toward what should have been certain death, something extraordinary happened, something no eye could predict and no mind could control. Allah commanded the fire with words that overturned the rules of existence, ordering it to be cool and peaceful upon Ibrahim. The same flames meant to destroy became harmless. The same fire meant to punish became protection. The crowd watched in disbelief as the impossible unfolded before them, the fire still raging, still burning, yet refusing to touch the one inside it. Ibrahim stood within the blaze untouched, unharmed, surrounded by flames that had lost their power, proving that fire burns only when Allah allows it to burn. This was not magic, not illusion, not chance. It was a declaration written in fire that Allah alone controls every force in existence. What was meant to end Ibrahim's mission instead confirmed it, because when Allah protects someone, no plan, no weapon, no crowd can change the outcome. The fire that was supposed to silence truth became its loudest witness, and the people who trusted in idols were forced to watch their ultimate weapon fail. In that moment, the balance of power shifted forever, and the world learned that faith, when rooted in absolute trust in Allah, can turn even the deadliest flames into peace. When the fire finally lost its meaning and the smoke cleared, something far more powerful than flames lingered in the air, because the people were no longer just staring at a man who survived. They were facing the collapse of everything they believed controlled their world. Fire had always been their symbol of dominance, punishment, and authority, yet it had just failed publicly, undeniably, and completely, and that failure exposed a truth they could not burn away. The same flames that were supposed to erase Ibrahim instead redefined reality itself, proving that power does not belong to crowds, kings, or customs, but to Allah alone, who controls not only life and death, but the very laws that govern existence. Some hearts trembled as they witnessed what no explanation could cover, while others hardened even more, because miracles do not soften every heart. They reveal what was already inside it. Those who were sincere felt shaken, questioning everything they had inherited, while those addicted to pride searched desperately for excuses, because accepting the truth would mean admitting they were wrong all along. The fire became a living lesson, not just for that generation, but for every generation after, showing that the tools of oppression lose their power the moment Allah withdraws His permission. What was once feared became a sign, and what was once used to control people became proof that control belongs only to the Creator. Ibrahim did not emerge boasting or demanding recognition, because his victory was never about proving himself right. It was about demonstrating that surrender to Allah brings protection in ways the mind cannot predict. His calm presence after the fire spoke louder than any argument ever could, because it showed that when faith is genuine, even the most terrifying outcomes lose their grip. The people were forced to confront a choice, not between fire and safety, but between humility and arrogance, between truth and comfort. And history shows that while some walked away unchanged, others carried the weight of that moment for the rest of their lives. Ibrahim himself walked forward with a faith no longer questioned by fear, because surviving the fire was not the goal, it was the result of complete trust. His belief had been tested at the highest level, stripped of support, surrounded by enemies, and placed in a situation where only Allah could intervene. And that is what made his faith unbreakable. He had reached a certainty where obedience mattered more than outcome, where trusting Allah was not a strategy for survival, but a way of life. This is why his story continues to resonate, because it teaches that true faith is not built in moments of ease, but in moments where everything else is taken away. Ibrahim's strength was not in resistance, but in submission. And that submission gave him a freedom no fire could take. From that point forward, Ibrahim's life became a living example of what it means to stand alone with Allah against the world, showing that isolation for the sake of truth is never real isolation. He carried forward a message forged in flames, a message that belief is not inherited blindly, but chosen consciously, and that trusting Allah may lead you into the fire before it leads you out. His survival was not just physical, it was spiritual elevation, a reminder that Allah raises those who remain sincere under pressure, and that trials are often the doorway to honor. The fire did not mark the end of Ibrahim's struggle, it marked the beginning of a legacy where faith was no longer theoretical, but proven, lived, and passed on as a standard for all who would come after him. What began as one man standing against his people did not end with the fire, because the fire was never the destination. It was the ignition point of a legacy that would stretch across centuries, prophets, and nations. Ibrahim walked away carrying more than survival. He carried the responsibility of truth, a truth that would be planted into future generations through patience, sacrifice, and unwavering devotion to Allah. His story did not remain trapped in one time or place. It became a foundation for monotheism itself, a reminder that worship belongs to the one who creates, sustains, and controls all things. From him came a lineage of prophets who carried the same message, that submission to Allah is not weakness, but clarity, not loss, but purpose. His willingness to stand firm when no one else would become a model for every believer who would later feel alone for choosing truth over comfort. Even today, his name is remembered not because he survived a fire, but because he never bowed to anything other than Allah, and that sincerity turned a single act of courage into an eternal example. His legacy burns brighter than flames ever could, because it lives in prayer, in sacrifice. In every moment, a believer chooses obedience over desire, certainty over doubt, and faith over fear. And this is why the story of fire becoming cool is not just history, it is a living reminder that the struggles believers face today are not random, nor are they beyond control. Just as the fire looked unstoppable, Just as destruction seemed guaranteed, Allah showed that what appears impossible to humans is effortless for Him. The same Lord who commanded the fire to be cool still commands outcomes today, still controls hardship, still turns trials into protection in ways unseen. This story teaches that faith does not always remove the fire. Sometimes it places you directly into it, but with a promise that it will not consume you. It reminds us that standing for truth may cost safety, comfort, or approval, but it never costs Allah's protection. When belief is sincere, fear loses its authority, because no force in creation can act independently of the Creator. The fire that was meant to erase Ibrahim instead immortalized his faith, proving that when a heart is anchored to Allah, even the most dangerous moments can become a source of peace. And that is the timeless message carried forward, that faith does not change the rules of the world by chance, it changes them by the command of Allah, turning what was meant to destroy into something that testifies to His power forever.